Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
And welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly on our topics this week. A new era in Kansas politics, maybe the end of a political era in Missouri, and a new price tag for KCI, plus roast and toast. But we begin with our interview segment and meet one of the members of the Kansas City Star's editorial board. Melinda Hinneberger joined the Star in January 2017. She has written for some of the nation's most prestigious news organizations, including The Washington Post, New York Times, Dallas Morning News, and most recently USA Today. Melinda Hinneberger, welcome to Ruckus. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you've had an obviously successful career on the East Coast. What prompted this move to Kansas City a couple of years ago?
Well, I'm from the Midwest, and my husband's first job was here in Kansas City at the Star, and we were ready to come back. As my dad used to say, I'm so glad you're coming back to America.
Are you pretty happy that you came back?
We are.
Enjoy living in Kansas City?
We are.
We're still talking about and trying to understand what exactly happened with the midterm elections. You wrote about that recently, and I think it's fair to say you suggested the more things change, the more they seem to stay the same.
Well, I just thought that the voters sent very mixed messages, and there's nothing particularly unusual about that. But it was funny to me that, for example, Missouri overwhelmingly chose Josh Hawley and yet voted against some of his main positions. Voters also went for an increase in the minimum wage, which Josh Hawley opposed. They went for Clean Missouri, which Josh Hawley opposed. So you really do wonder, love the guy, not his positions.
And you point out in Kansas that we have a new Democratic governor, but a still Republican legislator, and perhaps, according to the reports I've read, a more conservative legislature than the one that it replaces.
Yes, so it will be interesting to see how she's able to work, of course, with that more conservative group.
The editorial board endorsed a number of candidates, and there was an interesting process to decide who got the endorsements. What did the process look like?
It's actually a lot of fun. I enjoy our process every day because we really don't all think the same way and kick ideas around and have a very respectful but invigorating sometimes discussion about it. For the endorsements, we had as many candidates. We invited everybody to come in. Not everybody did come in, and we did make the decision that we couldn't endorse people who didn't want to come in and participate in the process.
Who didn't come in? Do you recall? Did Kobach come in?
Kobach did not come in. No, we would have loved to have had him in. And then there were these sometimes long courtships that never went anywhere, you know, where someone says, I'm coming in, I'm coming in, I'm coming in, never happens.
And these were people from both political parties and those who ran as independent candidates?
We invited, of course, everyone to come in. Those who did not come in, I think, were all Republicans.
It seems, from what I read, that most of the endorsements did go to Democrats.
Well, if only the Democrats come in, and we're only endorsing people who come in, then it was funny to me that since that was announced from the get-go that there was criticism that we only announced.
Why do you suppose they wouldn't come in? Do you think they were fearful or they thought it was pointless? Or what would be the rationale?
I honestly don't know, especially in the cases of people who said they were and then didn't make good on that promise. I don't know whether they thought it was better in this time of calling the press enemies of the people and, you know, these are the most disgusting people we've ever been around, whether it was a selling point for them not to get the, you know, not to have anything to do.
They're better not to be endorsed by the Star.
I do not know the answer. You would have to ask them.
We have a mayor's race coming up in Kansas City in a relatively few months. No incumbent mayor this time around. going to be watching that pretty closely?
Very closely, yes. In fact, I have already been to a couple of the debates. It's an interesting group of people.
And a lot of people.
Yes.
and interestingly enough, the one guy that when he entered the race, almost everyone who speculates said this is the guy, he's going to win, and he pulled out for medical purposes with good reason.
Yes.
So now I don't know that anyone could be considered the front runner.
No, Jason Kander did so much good by doing what he did and by sending the message that there's no shame in that and that it's very important to take care of your medical problem first. But it's really a great group from I've seen. The debates I've seen, I would like there to be fewer of them just because it's hard to have an interesting debate when you have so many people to hear from.
Harder for the media to cover, too, when you've got so many people in a primary.
And a lot of areas of agreement.
And I have to stop there. Thank you very much for coming in. I hope you'll come back and talk to us another time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. That is Kansas City Star editorial board member Melinda Hinneberger. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. Lisa Johnston is a columnist and consultant. Patrick Tuohy is director of municipal policy at the Show Me Institute, a free market think tank. Attorney Jim Heater is a former councilman and CEO of the Greater Kansas City Chamber. And attorney Steve Marakian is with the law firm of Warsh, Hobbs, and Marakian and is one of the apparently few Johnson County Republicans who did not vote for Laura Kelly.
How do you know?
I'm guessing. Although Steve was, I guess, not one of them, many Kansas Republicans came out publicly and repudiated their party's nominee for governor, Chris Kobach, and endorsed Democratic nominee and now governor-elect Laura Kelly. With all this GOP support, one might expect the new governor to have an easy time of it with the Republican-dominated state legislature. But early reports indicate the incoming legislature will be more conservative than its predecessor and will have some issues with Kelly's call for Medicaid expansion and continuing expansion of money spent on K-12 education. So how likely do you think it is, Lisa, that there will be peace and accord between the incoming governor and the incoming legislature?
Unlikely. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows in Topeka. I hate to disappoint. And I know Governor-elect Kelly has indicated a desire to try to work with her colleagues across the aisle, and that's great. However, it takes a lot of parties to be willing to do that, and that tends to then not work out so well when people have agendas that are in conflict. And one of the things that folks need to remember is that the dynamics in the legislature are similar in terms of the balance of power. The Republicans kept their supermajority, so there is likely to still be some tension and gridlock going forward into the session.
Let me turn to Mr. Marakian. How likely do you think it will be that there is going to be peace and accord between the new governor and the incoming legislature?
Well, I think there will be, I don't think there'll be a lot of peace and accord. And I think it's a mistake for people to assume that there was some sort of this massive wave in Kansas because of the Yoder defeat and so forth. The Kansas legislature is actually more conservative now than it was previously. Laura Kelly has come in with the idea of, kumbaya, let's all work together, which is always what the Democrats say. When the Democrats are in office, it's Republicans, you should work with us. Vice versa, I never see Democrats working with Republicans. So I don't think the Republicans that are in the House and the Senate in Kansas are going to show a great deal of willingness to bend to expansion of Medicaid, for example, or spending a lot more money on K-12, and there's no need to. Laura Kelly, in my view, is one Democrat who could work well with the Kansas legislature, the Republicans, if she chooses to. But if she tries to do massive rollbacks, let's have more taxes, let's spend a lot more money on K-12, let's do expansions of to Medicaid, there's going to be a lot of pushback, and I don't think it'll be successful.
Well, Jim, taking a look from your Missouri perspective, what do you think of the new governor in Kansas? She'll be inaugurated in January in the new legislature.
Well, I'm a little more optimistic than Lisa and Steve about possible
That's almost always the case.
It is almost
on everything.
Yes. I'm very much a glasses half full kind of guy, as you and our viewers know. But the reason I think that there's a greater likelihood for cooperation between Governor-elect Kelly and Governor Kelly to be and the legislature, even though it is a more conservative legislature than the previous legislature, is that she is an experienced government and political figure in Kansas. She has worked across the aisle, hence all the high-profile Republican endorsements she got, which is really key, I think, to her victory. So I think Republicans know that, and she knows that. And I also think that two of the biggest issues that she'll be dealing with, education funding and Medicaid expansion, are ones that may have some appeal to the Republican legislature. We've seen that in the past when the legislature actually approved Medicaid expansion, vetoed by Governor Brownback. So I think those two issues in particular are ones that will have broad-based legislative appeal, despite the conservative nature of the House and Senate.
Patrick, why do many Republicans oppose Medicaid expansion? We're told the federal government pays 90% of it.
Yeah, well, it's so expensive. In 2000, Kansas spent just over 7% of its state budget on Medicaid. Today, that's over 21%. It is eating up a greater and greater cost of state budgets, and so expanding the program with the promise of a little bit of federal money is just a bad idea. And of course, Kansas wants to spend more of its money on education. You can't grow spending everywhere. Something's got to give.
What happened to the growth of moderates in the Republican Party? Apparently some of those who were elected a couple of years ago were defeated in the most recent elections.
There's one example, Melissa Rooker, and she got mentioned last week on the program.
I think there were a couple of others too.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that there are still some moderates. I'm aware of some that are still there. But of course, a lot of the moderates were taken out in the bloodbath of 2012 when the Republicans sort of went after their own to try to get more conservatives in. And I'm not completely pessimistic. I agree with some of the points that Jim made. I think that there are some opportunities, and I think that Governor-elect Kelly will be more reasonable and won't dig in and be so entrenched as Brownback was to veto certain kinds
Quick
of
final
things.
question. If Jeff Collier had been the Republican nominee instead of Chris Kobach, would Laura Kelly be governor?
No. And you can see that from the other statewide races, the margin that the other Republicans received. It's fairly clear.
Agree with that?
Oh, Collier would have wanted to walk. It was a horrible mistake for the Republicans not to have nominated him. He lost by a few hundred votes. He would have won easily.
And of course, as we know, Kelly won by a huge margin in Johnson County that really made the difference.
Yeah.
All right, as long as Ruckus has been on the air, that's 20 years or so. And even before that, Claire McCaskill has been part of the Missouri political scene. She has served as Jackson County prosecutor, state legislator, Missouri auditor. She almost won a governor's race and is now finishing 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. She's leaving because she lost last week's election to a rising Missouri star, Attorney General and now Senator-elect Josh Hawley. While Kansas is traditionally a Republican state, Republicans saw a diminution of power in last week's elections. Missouri, meantime, seems to be increasingly red, with only 2 members of the U.S. House, 1 statewide office holder, and minority status in the state legislature. Democrats say they need to and plan to rebuild. Jim, how do they go about doing that?
I think there are at least 3 things. If I were advising the Democratic Party in the state of Missouri, and I'm not, but if I were, I'd say do at least 3 things. The first is to continue to find and run good candidates at the local level. I think grassroots as opposed to top-down is the way for the Democratic Party in Missouri to rebuild, and they've had some successes with State Senator Lauren Arthur north of the river, for example. They had a couple of other very close state Senate races this last time, which were in districts that otherwise were formerly not competitive. The second thing I think I would do is I would encourage them to make the most of fairer redistricting approved by the voters of the state of Missouri, and also maybe even consider a lawsuit like Democrats in the state of Pennsylvania did at the state Supreme Court. I think more equally proportioned state Senate and representative districts as well as congressional districts will help the Democrats a lot. The third thing I would do is I would look for strong, appealing, particularly young candidates. I think it's always important. I think we've learned in the last few years that candidates do make a difference. They've run some very good ones lately. Republicans have run some good ones, but I think the emphasis on the right candidate is important.
Well, what about the presence of what Claire McCaskill in one of her last radio commercials called the crazy Democrats? Those people in the party, do they make a difference?
Well, I think they certainly have made a difference. I think you explained the President of the United States' success on exactly that. People are uncomfortable with the extremes, and so maybe some moderates bounce back and forth. We've seen that in Kansas. I think part of the problem in Missouri is that they have said to a lot of people who might be Democrats, look, if you're pro-life, you're not welcome. And so they've by hewing to kind of the extremes, and maybe it's because the Democrats do so well on the coasts that the Midwest becomes infected with extreme ideology. But so I think that certainly played a role. But you know, Senator McCaskill is very shrewd, and she may have looked at the writing on the wall and said, "I've got to shake things up," and that was a gamble.
Lisa, Jim talked about the need to rebuild at the local level. Do you see some Kansas City area Democrats who might be instrumental in future Missouri Democratic victories?
I think there are certainly a lot of folks who could rise to the occasion, and we're just going to have to kind of keep an eye on that and see how it develops. And I certainly hope Jason Kander, for example, after he takes care of himself, hopefully he'll get back into politics, and we'll see how the mayoral race shakes out this time. But one of the things that people need to be aware of about Missouri is how much Missouri has changed. Missouri used to truly be a purple state. In 2008, the night of the election, they couldn't even call Missouri. It was like literally 50-50 between Obama and McCain. And then over the last 8 to 10 years, the pendulum has swung very far, such that Romney won by 9 in 2012 and President Trump won by over 18 points in 2016. So while I do think there are some opportunities, I also think there are going to be some challenges, especially for Democrats who try to go the traditional route, the bench building route, start with small races and so forth.
Claire McCaskill, I think, has said she's probably finished, announced no plans to run for anything else, but we know from her history that she very much wanted at one time to be Missouri governor, may still want to be Missouri governor. We have a Republican governor now who likely run for re-election, although he wasn't elected the first time. He was lieutenant governor. Do you think she might decide to run for Missouri governor?
Well, I don't think she will, and I hope she doesn't. I think that.
Why? Because she might win? Or?
No. Because I think in a really fair and honest sense, without being critical of her, because she did a lot of good things while she was senator. She was a good senator for a while, but I think her time has passed. And I think the problem that Claire McCaskill faces, or would face, and a lot of Democrats face, is that the Democratic Party, and this is why Missouri has changed so dramatically, I believe, to Lisa's point. The Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party of Claire McCaskill 10 years ago, or the Democratic Party 20 years ago. Missouri has changed like a great deal of the country, except on the coasts, has changed. And that is, most Americans are not far left, progressive socialists. They're just not. The Democratic Party right now is an opportunity to rebuild itself with young, energetic, moderate Democrats in sort of the old-fashioned Democratic, liberal but not far left. Claire's not one of them. She tried to move that direction, and that's one of the reasons she lost this election. She couldn't get there. But as Patrick said, the crazies are taking over the Democratic Party, and if the Democratic Party doesn't push back, they're going to continue to suffer defeats, and people like Claire and people like Nancy Pelosi, though she may keep her speakership, people like her are not going to succeed in the current Democratic Party unless it changes.
Speaker in perpetuity. When Kansas City voters overwhelmingly approved one terminal airport about a year ago, they were told the new KCI would open about 3 years from now, November 2021. The cost for the new facility about $1 billion. As of now, the opening has been delayed to roughly 4 years from now, October, November, December 2022. And the price tag, well, it's no longer $1 billion, closer to $2 billion. Should voters care? Were they misled? Are the changes inevitable? Let's begin with Patrick, who may have been paying attention to this issue.
So I've been writing about this for years, and nothing has changed. This has been a car wreck of public policy since 2013 and maybe before then, and so it's frustrating. And certainly you can say in big projects, and this project is Kansas City's biggest ever, you can expect a little escalation in cost. You can expect setbacks on time, but we haven't even started building this yet. And we're going to find out very soon what the airlines think of this. This is a huge cost to them. And I am not sure that Kansas is as valuable, or Kansas City, I should say, is as valuable an airline market as we think we are. And when the prices go up so dramatically, we've doubled the price, now more than doubled the price, it makes me wonder if the early premise, which is that rebuilding is cheaper than renovation, was ever true.
Jim, you've dealt with big projects as the head of the chamber, also on the city council, and you are familiar with these kinds of things. What's your sense of what's going on at KCI? Should we begin to be concerned about the implementation of this plan?
Mike, I think a couple of things. First of all, it's important when we talk about cost numbers that we compare apples and apples. So when we compare the $1 billion cost that the voters essentially approved to the $2 billion cost that's in the newspapers today, it's not quite apples and apples, because that $2 billion includes some $400 million in financing costs. That's like the interest on the mortgage on your house. So an apples and apples comparison is more like $1 billion to $1.5 billion. The second thing to note is that the airport project has expanded since it was approved by the voters. The airlines have asked for more gates, more parking, more facilities. So it's a bigger project now than it was before. Now, a lot of us who looked at that issue closely at the time that voters approved fully expected this. We expected it was going to end up being a bigger project than was approved at the time. So in that sense, it's not a surprise.
But nobody was saying that then, were they?
Well, that's the third point I would make, is that I do think, when you ask who would be concerned, I think that the city needs to step forward and talk candidly with the public about these kinds of issues, because there's a growing perceptional issue that's really important.
Well, I think as we do this program, we tape on Thursday morning, City Council Airport Committee is meeting and
today, actually.
It may be consequential
Yes.
what comes out of that meeting.
So there are a couple of really important agreements, one with the airlines and one, of course, with Edgemoor as a developer, that need to get approved, finalized, signed in the very near future, so the construction can start within, hopefully, a couple of months.
Lisa, why should voters care how much it costs? Because after all, voters are not paying for this, the airlines are paying for it.
I think that's a little disingenuous. I mean, yes, the airlines are paying for it, but they're going to pass the cost along to flyers. And so if, you know, folks just happen never to fly, then of course they won't pay for it. But those of us who ever use the airport will. And the public perception of this becomes very important. To me, it's kind of like saying, let's all buy a car together and holding out a Toyota Corolla. And then after everyone says, oh, yes, okay, we can do that, then deciding you're going to buy a high-end Lexus instead. I mean, this price has really blown up, and they've got to rein this in, and they have to do something about the public perception problem that they're going to have.
So I am annoyed, frankly, to find out that Jim and probably others knew at the time of the campaign that the numbers the public was being given on the cost of the airport weren't real. The city should have never had this vote before the people knew exactly what they were being asked to do. But the Kansas City Star and civic leaders just wanted a new airport. They knew the cost was going to be higher, and they just rammed it through. That's disappointing. The second thing is, we're embarking on 35 years of debt to build this airport, but airlines only contract with an airport for 5 years. It is entirely possible that after 5 years, Southwest and other airlines say, you know what, we want to renegotiate, and the taxpayers are stuck with costs.
And so far, the airlines haven't signed off on this
That's
either.
exactly right.
Yeah.
I was just getting ready to ask Steve Marakian his opinion, and time's up, unfortunately. Now we have to head for the soapbox for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each to analyze, emphasize, or scandalize. And we start with Lisa. Are you going to scandalize?
I hope not.
Okay.
My roast is for the states that took an eternity to get their results in because they were having election workers hand compare signatures with the voting record signature. They need to move to some kind of computer program where scans are automatically compared and discrepancies are flagged, or give voters a PIN number that they have to enter on their ballot so that this can be done more efficiently. Those states need to do better.
Steve Marakian.
Saturday Night Live recently mocked Congressman Dan Crenshaw for wearing an eye patch for a war injury. And after graciously accepting SNL's belated apology, this wounded warrior said that rather than being thanked for his military service, he would prefer the simple phrase, never forget. As a veteran, I really like that. So this being Veterans Day week, I'm toasting my dad, my two brothers, and Mr. Mike High Pockets Shannon, who fought the Kong from his desk in Saigon. Never forget, brother.
It was beneath the desk, actually, Steve. Patrick?
A roast to Mayor Sly James and his Kansas City Health Department, who a few weeks ago swept in like characters from a Dickens novel to volunteers feeding the homeless in a park, dumped out the food, and poisoned it so it couldn't be eaten. The story got national attention and was condemned by organizations on the right and the left. The bitter irony for Kansas Cityans is, had this been a group of wealthy citizens dining in the park, the mayor would have picked up the tab and called it economic development. Kansas City needs to do better.
And Jim.
Mike, I would like to toast the Greater Kansas City YMCA and its CEO, David Byrd, for the announcement this past week of a new downtown YMCA in the former Lyric Opera building. And it's going to be a terrific addition to downtown, to our community. Anyone who's not familiar with what downtown urban YMCAs are these days is in for a treat, because they are great, great community centers as well as great fitness centers. David has worked on this for more than 8 years with lots of twists and turns, so congratulations to David Byrd and the Greater Kansas City YMCA.
Okay, and finally, here is a roast to Republican Jacob Turk, who has lost yet another election to Congressman Emanuel Cleaver for the 5th District U.S. House seat in Missouri. This was Turk's try number 7 against Cleaver in District number 5. Maybe we should think less about term limits for office holders and think more about term limits for perennial candidates. And that is Ruckus for this week. We're away for a while, returning on December the 13th. Hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. For the Ruckettes and the crew, and this was a great panel tonight. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for watching, and good night.